it's Shar. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. We are officially at the end of the year, which means it is time for me to look forward to the next publishing year and look at all of the releases that are coming out in 2024 that I am most excited about. I have 24 books for you in this video that I have on my radar that you may be interested in. Now, to be honest with you, besties, if I sat here and told you the summary of each and every single book, it would be a long ass fucking video. It really would. So instead, I'm gonna challenge myself to tell you about the book in a very brief way. So let's start with January. I have two books coming out on January 9th. The first is Don't Want You Like a Best Friend, which is a historical sapphic romance described as kind of like the Parent Trap, because we have these two girls who decide that they want to get their individual parents together and they really don't have an interest in like marrying, but of course it's historical romance, and these two girls end up falling in love. And yes, Don't Want You Like a Best Friend is a Taylor Swift lyric that's coming out on January 9th, as I mentioned. And I have The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins releasing on January 9th as well. And in this story, we're following the descendant of this woman named Ruby, and Ruby was kidnapped as a child. She's been a widow 4 times, and she was incredibly wealthy, and she leaves all of her belongings to Cam, her adopted son. But Cam really wants nothing to do with this fortune. He does not want to be associated with it. He doesn't want anything at all. But he ends up inheriting the house. He and his wife, Jules, decide to take the house, and it becomes like a family drama, unraveling secrets kind of story. And listen, spooky house is all you need to tell me. On January 23rd, I also have 2 books releasing. The first is No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall seems to be a haunted house story, which I love Kate Alice Marshall's haunted house story, but of course it is adult. Now in this book, we're following Emma, and Emma and her sisters have inherited like quite a few things from her family after they pass, and one of the things that she ends up inheriting is the house. Kind of like the heiress, Emma really doesn't want anything to do with it, but she ends up in a financial situation where she has no other choice. Her husband gets laid off, they lose their apartment, and Emma finds out that she's pregnant, and they just end up needing a place to live, so they agree to take on this house. And of course, weird shit starts happening. I believe there are a lot of like family dynamics in the story as well. I'm very excited for this because I really love Kate Alice Marshall, even though I haven't read one of her adult books, but I love her YA mostly. Also on January 23rd is probably the only YA on this list. I have a very small number of them on this list, but this is The Getaway List by Emma Lord. In The Getaway List, we are following our main female character who is 18. She's graduated from high school, and she's realizing that she's been a pathological people pleaser and really doesn't know who she is at all, and she's hoping to kind of find herself. And she has this friend who lives in New York City. This friend has came into money because his mother wrote something that ended up getting picked up and turned into a movie. So she goes to visit him, and they have something called The Getaway List. Kind of just like a list of things that they've always wanted to do together. So they go around New York City and they do these things together with their ragtag group of friends. It is coming of age, and the premise of it sounds very cute. It feels like the kind of book that I would want to read in summer. So even though it is coming out on January 23rd, I will likely not read this until the summer. And the final book that I'm looking forward to releasing this January, I'm recording this relatively early, so I'm sure other books will be announced and released after this video, but this is Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday. In this story, we're following our main female character who, when she was like a teenager, went to Canada, ended up meeting this hockey player named Mike at the mall. Don't love that name, but anyway, there's nothing wrong with it. It just makes you think of like the kind of characters that are named Mike in books. But anyway, she meets him at a mall in Canada. They like hit it off, and she never speaks to him again. And essentially throughout her life, people pass to her about having a boyfriend, so she just lies. So she says, I have a boyfriend, he's Canadian, he lives in Canada. Except Mike grows up to be a famous hockey player, and he does run into her again, even though she thinks they'll never see each other again, and finds out that she's been saying that they are dating, and they fall in love. Let's talk about books releasing in February. I have a few. On February 6th, we have Bride by Ali Hazelwood. You all know I love Ali Hazelwood's books, and this is her first paranormal romance featuring a werewolf like alpha pack leader and a vampire bride. And I think it's fated mates, they fall in love. I'm just very excited to read a paranormal romance by Ali Hazelwood. While I definitely loved her feminist books, I am excited to see what she does with a paranormal romance. On February 14th, we have The Hollow Dead by Darcy Coates. This is the 4th book in like the Whispering Dead series, which I've described as like ghost whisperers, like super cozy, perhaps the coziest of all of Darcy Coates' books, where we're following a woman who can see spirits, who can see ghosts, and she is helping them move on to the other side, with of course this overarching mystery in that she has no memories. The very first time we meet this character, she is running through the woods and being chased by this organization who has very nefarious intentions, and I just love this like whole little ragtag group of friends and the story of this woman who can see ghosts and how she helps spirits to the other side. This is a continuation of that series, so I'm very excited to read this. There aren't that many books releasing in February that I'm excited about, but the last one is An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. S.T. Gibson wrote A Dowry of Blood, perhaps one of my favorite books. I really enjoy their writing style, and they're releasing 2 books in 2024, but the one I'm focusing on right now is An Education in Malice. Now, you all know I don't like books set in academic settings, but this is a sapphic retelling of Carmilla, which is already sapphic, and that's why I'm interested in it. We have 2 girls who are kind of obsessed with each other at this very dark boarding school. Then we have March releases. On March 5th, there are 2 books releasing that I am excited for. One is Anita de Monte Laughs Last, and this is a story of a girl who is an art student, and she is trying to just kind of navigate life as a person of color within this very like white community, and how she feels outcasted, and she ends up involved with this white man, and she is researching, and she finds the story of Anita de Monte. And Anita de Monte was a very famous painter, a very well-known painter who disappears, and people essentially stop caring about, like, they don't look for her, they don't care about why she disappeared, but our main character does, and she becomes obsessed with trying to figure out with what happened to Anita and drawing parallels to her current reality right now. And what I've heard is that this story is an exploration of whose story gets to get told, and I'm very excited for this. I think it's going to be such an interesting read. Also on March 5th is The Marble Queen by Amanda Kopp. You've heard me speak about this story before. This was supposed to be released in September of this year, but it got pushed back to March of next year. And this story is a graphic novel. We're following a woman who gets into an arranged marriage with the leader of this rival family in order to bring political peace. It's an agreement between the two, and she thinks that she's marrying the prince, but she's actually marrying the queen, which I'm very excited for. I have Where Sleeping Girls Lie, which is one of the only other YA books on this list. This is a YA mystery thriller in which we are following a young girl who is just started at a new boarding school. She's been homeschooled her whole life, but gets the opportunity to attend this boarding school, which is like a very privileged place that would open the doors to a lot of possibility for her. But once she arrives, she very immediately stands out, and she's had bad luck her whole life, but one of her roommate Elizabeth, ends up disappearing on her very first night there, and people think that she has something to do with it. And throughout that, she gets the attention of these 3 girls who are very mysterious, very witchy, kind of run the place, and she starts discovering some secrets of this place. And I think more people start to disappear. Listen, I don't typically love YA, but I could get down with a YA murder or thriller, so I'm very excited for this. Talk about April releases. On April 2nd, Holly Jackson is coming out with a book called The Disappearance of Rachel Pierce. If Holly Jackson sounds familiar, she wrote the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, which I absolutely loved, and she also wrote 5 Survive, which I absolutely hated, but third time's the charm. So this book is most similar to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, in my opinion. In this book, we're following Belle, and Belle's mother mysteriously disappeared many years ago. Her mother is Rachel Price, and her family agrees to do like a true crime documentary about it, which Belle just really wants to be over so she can get to her normal life. But Rachel comes back and she has the most unbelievable story about what happened, and Belle doesn't believe her. So she's determined to figure out exactly what happened with her mother and what's the real story here. Listen, I love Holly Jackson's like mysteries usually, so fingers crossed for this one. Also on April 2nd is Abby Jimenez's new book, Just for the Summer. I have no idea what this is about, and I don't need to know. I don't need to know. I love Part of Your World. I love yours truly. And I'm very excited to love this one too, but please don't let that be a jinx. Please let me love it. And also on April 2nd, we have A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Senku McDonough, who also wrote The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This is set in the same world, but it's not following the same characters at all. It is just within the same world. And in this story, we're following a witch who has lost her powers, and she's kind of forced to look after her aunt's inn. And while she's doing that, she finds a book of like kind of ancient sorcery and spells that she thinks is going to help her get her powers back. But in order to do it, she needs the assistance of a very, very grumpy historian who she does not get along with. And of course, it is also a romance, so these two will fall in love. Then I have a sapphic romance. This is Late Bloomer by Maisie Eddings. In this story, we're following a woman named Opal, and Opal made minimum wage her whole life. She was just kind of making a buy, kind of unnoticed, until she wins the lottery and has a shit ton of fucking money, and people start coming out of the woodworks expecting a handout. Suddenly everybody's friendly to her, suddenly everybody wants money, and my girl's a people pleaser. So she keeps saying yes. And eventually she's like, I'm tired of being used and abused by these people. Like, I'm out. So to her, she just takes all of the money and she buys a failing like flower farm in Asheville, North Carolina. She's like, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna let the flowers live out their life, and I'm gonna start my painting business. Except someone else already owns the farm, and her name is Pepper. And Pepper is like, yo, I'm the rightful owner of this farm and I am not going anywhere. So they agree to just kind of cohabitate and live together. And of course, they fall in love. And I'm very excited for like this grumpy sunshine and like this twist of her winning the lottery and opening a flower farm. Very fun. And that's coming out on April 16th. Oh, you all know Miss Emily Henry and I have a history because Beach Read was fine. I absolutely loved People We Meet on Vacation. I DNF'd Book Lovers because like this is not a fucking romance. And she's coming out, I skipped whatever her new release was, but she's coming out with a book called Funny Story, which I actually think I would have an interest in. Funny Story is the story of this woman who was in a relationship with this man who like always told the most beautiful story about how they met, they were engaged, they were just like such a happy couple, until he decides that he's actually in love with his best friend Petra and breaks up with his fiance and goes to Petra instead. So our main character is left feeling absolutely humiliated and is like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? And she needs a place to live. Lucky for her, there's one other person who understands exactly what she's going through, and that is Peppa's ex. She ends up getting a like apartment or place to stay with her ex-fiance's ex, if that makes sense. I think it leans a little bit more heavily into the romance and the comedy, but of course Emily Henry does also bring a lot of emotional complexity into her stories, and much like People We Meet on Vacation, I think that I would really enjoy Funny Story. This is releasing again on April 23rd. From here on in the video, I won't like do month splits because these are just like tricklings of what's left throughout the year. So on July 4th, we have Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. This does not have an official summary, but I really enjoy Grady Hendrix's stories, so I'm excited to see what this is and what he does with it. Ellie Hazelwood is also releasing a book in June called Not in Love, which is a contemporary romance about this woman who works in STEM, but in like the private corporation aspect of STEM, not within academia. And she works for this organization as like a biological engineer. I don't fucking know. Something. But she works with this organization and they end up in a hostile takeover. This other organization is trying to take over them. This other company wants to buy them out, and she's not here for it, but the person who's trying to buy them out, they have an undeniable chemistry, these two, and they decide they're gonna have a secret affair and they're gonna just fuck. no strings attached, with the agreement that this ends when one of their companies wins out. And of course, they are going to fall in love. This seems very, very steamy for Ali Hazelwood. It seems like it's going to have a different direction. It feels like it has a darker tone than some of her other stories. So looking forward to that. And I have A Novel Life by Ashley Poston, who of course you can see the 7-year slip right here. And The Dead Romantics on the shelf too, who she's the author of those 2 books. In this book, we're following a professor of literature, Eileen Merriweather, and she is going on like this vacation with her friend to upstate New York, except her friend kind of bails out and Eileen ends up driving through this town that is literally out of a fictional story because she's trapped in a fictional story. This town is stuck in kind of like a time loop. They can't move forward and they're stuck exactly where the author left them, and she is trying to figure out what's going on and how to save them. And of course, she has a love interest in the story who doesn't really want her to fix this and has his own ending in mind for them. That sounds ominous. I mean, he wants the woman, Eileen, and him to get together. Not he wants the whole town to stay stuck on time loop forever. It sounds bizarre, but also really interesting. This is coming out on June 25th. On August 13th, we have Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. This is a retelling of sorts. This is a retelling of Macbeth, but from Lady Macbeth's perspective. And Lady Macbeth is such an interesting and complex character that I think it's going to be so much fun to read from her perspective. If the name Ava Reid sounds familiar, she wrote The Wolf and the Woodsman, I think. I like retellings, and I'm really excited to see this perspective of the Macbeth story from Lady Macbeth's viewpoint. And the final book with an actual publication date is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft. So this is a sapphic fantasy of Lorelai, who's on this expedition to find something called the Fabled Spring, and they're there with 6 people, except that while they're there, the person who's leading the expedition is murdered, dies. And the only person that Lorelai is sure is innocent is her academic rival Sylvia, who she finds infuriatingly gorgeous. So of course it's sapphic, they fall in love. But beyond that, it's also a murder mystery on a ship because Lorelai has to figure out what exactly happened to her mentor because she's now in charge of the expedition, and they also have to continue with their research and their search for this fabled spring. I'm not making this sound great, but it feels like a kind of gothic sapphic fantasy set on the ocean, and that is why I think I'm going to enjoy that. And again, this is releasing on September 17th. And that leaves us with our final 2 books on this list, which are books, well, 3 books that don't actually have a publication date. The first is Crimson Crown by Heather Walter. Now, Heather Walter wrote the Malice and Misrule books, which I really loved. Those were retellings of Maleficent. No, Sleeping Beauty, right? Maleficent is a Sleeping Beauty. Anyway, it's Maleficent's story, and we learn more about her backgrounds, but of course it's not actually Maleficent. Her name is Alice, and they call her Malice because she lives in this fey world where they're really bullied, but this isn't a video about Malice and Misrule. Crimson Crown is Snow White's retelling from the point of view of the evil queen, and that's all I know. That's all I need to know. Apparently there's a love interest. Don't know who that love interest is. The summary on Goodreads right now is very, very small. It doesn't have official publication yet, but if it does release, I'll be very excited to read another Heather Walter. Then I have the sequel to Jessod Air, which isn't even on Goodreads. I have no reason to believe it's coming out in 2024, but I'm hopeful that it is because the author of this book on her Instagram has already mentioned that she's working on the sequel, and in her bio, she says author of the Jessod Air and its sequel. So I'm hoping that announcement will come at some point that we will get a sequel to the Jessod Air in 2024, which I'm very excited about because I know how that book ends and I want to know what happens after. This one is me literally being a clown here because absolute fucking delusion. But on my shelf up there, which you can't see, is a special edition of Hellbent because Hellbent loved, obsessed, and I want to continue with Alex and Darlington's story. I want to know what happens. But besties, between the release of Ninth House and Hellbent was multiple years. And Leigh Bardugo is releasing a new book this year, which I'm just not interested in. So I don't actually think that the sequel to Hellbent will be released this year, but I can be delusional and I can think that it will, but I really don't, because Lee Bardugo is already releasing a book this year. So maybe in 2025, it's not officially part of this list, but just know that if that gets announced at some point, I will be screaming. I will be screaming. All right, besties, this video has been long enough. As always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what books you are looking forward to reading in 2023. If there's anything you are super excited for, please subscribe if you are not already, because it does really support me and this channel. And I am going to see you in my next video. Bye.